I'm working on a job that I do pretty annually. It's the same cheer team, and they bring me their Letterman jackets in order to embroider on them. And I decided today to run both the Blessing as well as Grateful, the red line. But in using the red line, and the purpose of this video is to, number one, show you guys how to line up for embroidery on the red line once the item is actually on the embroidery machine. Number two, I'm also going to show you the step-by-step process that I go through in order to prepare the jacket, hoop the jacket, and get it ready to go on the embroidery machine. And then a third point also would be just to show you how I'm learning to navigate the differences between the domestic machine and the industrial machine. There are differences, and they're good differences. They're not bad differences, but there are differences, and it's been a learning curve. So this particular one, I'm pretty proud of and actually impressed that I kind of figured it out a little bit myself. So I wanted to share that with you. In the event that you have a red line and you want to learn how to line up your embroidery, or if you're looking into getting a red line or an industrial machine, and you want to see what the process is in order to get everything to line up just right. So the jacket that I'm talking about is this one here. It is a basic Letterman jacket, pretty lightweight, and it comes from All We Do Is, and that's the name of the company, actually, AWDIS. And they sell these awesome Letterman jackets. They come in different colors, but this particular color is the one for the team. It's the gray and red, and I embroider the diamond life, and I have a template for the rhinestones to go around it, so it turns out to be a really cute jacket for the girls. So at this point, what I'm going to do is turn the camera around and show you how I'm going to lay out a blank jacket to get it prepared to go onto the red line. All right, being that I cannot find the correct tripod, please bear with me as I am holding the camera and doing this with one hand. But the first thing I generally do with my jackets, no matter what equipment I'm going to use to embroider with, I'm going to measure, because I want to be 100% sure that each and every jacket turns out as close to the same as they possibly can. So I start with measuring, and this little tab on the back of these jackets, sometimes they're off center. That's kind of frustrating, but I work through it. The first thing I do is I'll take a straight ruler, and what I'm going to do is measure from the bottom of this tab down 1 inch. That's the highest I want my embroidery to go. So the first thing I do is I take a water soluble magic pen, so to speak, and then I'll mark right here. That way I know I won't go any higher than that for my embroidery, right? So there's my first mark. My second mark that I make is between the shoulders, and I take my ruler, same ruler, and lay it out, and I make sure that it comes to an even measurement, because what you guys know about me, I don't do math very well, so I want it as easy as it possibly can be. So the cool thing is that's 14 inches roughly. This is a very small jacket, and I know half of that is 7. So I'm going to mark a line up to make sure that I know where not only the highest my embroidery is going to go, but the center line of where it's going to go. The next marks I make on the jacket is going to be to make sure that when I hoop it, everything is straight. So to be 125% sure, I measure this as well. And this can be a little tricky, because typically the more experienced people can eyeball it and get it kind of straight. So like, for instance, with me standing here, this looks, you know, pretty straight, about right here. But I want to be 100% sure because, as I mentioned before, there's 13 jackets in all right now, and I need to be 120% sure that all of them are going to turn out looking their absolute best. So what I do is grab my handy dandy tape measure, and I go off of the millimeters side, and I first check where that shoulder seam is to make sure that it's as close to even as possible. See, this one's just a little bit further back, so I need to keep that in mind. All right. And so I measure from the shoulder seam down to the ruler on this side. All right. And then I get a measurement. Doing this one-handed is tragic. So roughly 110, all right, millimeters or centimeters, whatever the heck it is, 110 little lines. And then I measure the other side to make sure that they are lining up, and I try and get it up by the seam. And then I come down and I look, and look at that. Look at how close that is. That's totally awesome. It's not going to be spot on perfect in a lot of instances, but I try to get it as close as possible. So now that I know that this ruler is lined up pretty even, now I'm just going to make marks close to the edge all the way across. You can make a solid line if you want. I just do a dotted line. And then that way, when I hoop it, I have this guide to help me make sure that my hoop is level when I'm hooping this jacket. Here's my jacket. I have my marks. That's the farthest up that I want my embroidery to go. Here's the middle center line, and here is a line that helps me make sure that when I hoop it, it's going to be hooped straight. So I'm going to move this for right now, and I'm going to get my stabilizer ready. So I lay out my stabilizer. I put my hoop down, and then I cut my stabilizer right up the side, and that's that. So here's my stabilizer, and the bottom ring is the largest, so I'm going to it's already adjusted for the thickness of the jacket because I've used this already, but you would set your adjustment. And I'm going to basically center my stabilizer on this larger outer ring. Now I'm going to take the jacket, unbutton it so that we can lay it flat on this hoop. Now, one thing I also tried to do to help myself is I'll lay the hoop with the stabilizer out on this type of grid and get a good feel for where the center line is by looking at the lines on the mat itself. So, because of course, once you lay the jacket down over the top of it, you're not going to be able to see the center, and there are no marks on here. There's a little bit of a divot there to let you know that's the center, but for the most part, you can't really tell the center is there because this jacket is awfully thick and hard to feel that divot. So I'm going to now just lay my jacket in place. Now I notice my stabilizer shifted, so I'm going to pull that back down because we want the stabilizer to be centered as much as possible in the hoop, or at least make sure the hoop is completely covered. And now I'm going to stretch out, well, not stretch, but smooth out the jacket to get all of the wrinkles and that type stuff out of the way of the hoop. Now, because this line is so close to the top, I don't want um, the feet on the embroidery machine to hit my hoop. So I bring this down in this tab down inside the hoop area so that I can make sure I got plenty of room for my embroidery. And now, so I know this was the center right in here. So this is off a little bit. So I'm going to move it over some and carefully move it over some. Keep my eye on my stabilizer underneath to make sure it doesn't shift off of the hoop, because again, I need to be sure that my stabilizer is completely within the hoop. The hoop is covered with stabilizer. All right. Now the jacket is smooth enough. So I take my hoop, make sure that my brackets are lined up the way they're supposed to be. And then I go ahead and start the process of hooping. Now, again, you remember this line I put there to make sure that it's straight. What I generally go by is I'll look at different things on the side of the hoop to try and make sure that it's even on both sides. So like in this instance, I know this would have been a good way to line it up if I could have brought it down far enough to line it up with these two notches on the side. Or you can line up, because the line is so far across the way I put it, you can line it up with the screws possibly. So there's a number of ways to do it. And there's also lines on the inside of the hoop that you can use at the center point if I had it down far enough where it's centered, but I don't. So because that line is so high up, I'm going to have to go off of, for lack of a better word, feel. But what I'm also going to do is put my fingers over the divot, both my index fingers, at the base of my nail, and then check to see if that line lines up pretty darn close to the tip of my fingertip. And from what I'm looking at, it's almost spot on. This side could come down just a little bit. But those are little things that I do to try to make sure that everything lines up the way it's supposed to. And then on top of that, sometimes I just go by sight. But as I mentioned, this particular order, in my opinion, is super important. And these kids are out on display. You don't want them out with a crooked embroidery project on the back of their jacket. So now that I have that lined up pretty darn well, I'm going to go ahead and hoop this. And there's a little bit of slack, so I'm just slightly, ever so slightly, going to tug on the fabric, because you don't want it to be stretched, but you also don't want it to be flopping around super loose, because like there's a little bit of slack here as well. I'm going to pull that just a little itty bitty bit. All right, and now that that's in there, I'm going to go ahead and put pressure on that corner and pop that hoop into place. So now this jacket is hooped and ready to go on the embroidery machine. And what I'm doing now at this point is reaching on the back side and squeezing just a little bit to get that hoop good and snug on the hoop to make sure that it doesn't pop off while it's embroidering. All right, so this jacket is hooped, ready to go on the machine. Now these lines I also use to help me line up the embroidery on the embroidery machine. Right, so I have one jacket on the machine ready to go ahead and go. So I'm going to leave this here for the time being, and we'll move over to the red line to line up our jacket. We are over at Grateful, and she is ready to rumble. Notice the embroidery design is ready to be stitched out. Now, this hoop I already have programmed in the machine. We'll have to do a video on how to make sure that your correct hoop is selected on another video, but just for sake of argument, you have the correct hoop selected as I do, and we are going to get this lined up. Now, this machine just so happens to have a laser that you can use in order to line up your stuff, but I'm not going to use the laser because not everybody has one. And I want to show you how I go about lining this up without a laser. So similarly to the jacket that we had out there on the table, my line I have lined up with the sides of the brackets. So those are already lined up so that I know for the most part it's pretty straight. Here's my center line right here to let me know that this is the center of the jacket and where the center of the design should go. Then way back here is the line that's the very top of where I need my embroidery to go. All right, so that's step number one, making sure that your lines are clearly marked so that you know where and how to line up your design. So now that we have that, let's move over to the control panel. And here is the design. And this button up here is the hoop. All right, so we need to touch that. And what it's going to do is load your design in a representation of the hoop to let you know whether or not you're in your parameters, the correct parameters, and not going to embroider outside of the hoop. So we have the correct hoop selected, which is found here if you want to change your hoop. I don't, so we're going to skip that for right now because I have the right hoop selected. And so now I need to make sure that this lines up with the jacket the way it's supposed to. All right, so what I'm going to do is do what's called an outline check. All right, before doing an outline check, there's a couple of things we want to keep in mind. The first thing is we want to know what needle is actually doing the outline check. That's really important because my machine could be on needle number 7, but I'm looking at needle number 1 thinking that everything's lining up and it's not. So you need to double check that first. So over here, we're going to touch the needle and see which needle is selected. Needle number 1, which is the easiest one to determine, you know, where your thing is lining up, because needle number 1 is kind of hard to mistake what needle that is. So 1 is already selected. So keeping that in mind, here's needle number 1. So we want to keep an eye on this first needle. All right. So that's good. And what you want to do is see if needle number 1 is lined up with that line. And right now, looking at it, it's off just a little bit. So we're going to adjust that as well. So now that we know it's needle number 1, let's go back into the hoop menu. And the first thing I want to do is center my design. So it was off just a little bit this way. So I'm going to move the hoop. Make sure I'm moving it in the right direction, because a lot of times I get that mixed up. So this is telling me I'm going to move the hoop that way. This is telling me I'm going to move the hoop that way. So I want it to come over this way a little bit so that this can slide over just a smidge to line up with that line. So I'm going to touch here and show you that needle number 1 coming over. See how it's sliding over? All right, so I slid it over. Now notice this actually moved as well. This also helps you make sure that everything is still within the right parameter. So now that I've moved it over, my concern at this point is making sure, because I don't have to worry about whether it's lined up this way, because I did that from just lining it up with the hoop itself. So I know that's straight, but I definitely want to be sure that my embroidery is not going to go higher than this line here. How would I do that? I'm going to do an outline check and show you how an outline check works. It's really cool. So I hit outline check and it's saying confirm move frame along the design outline. Yes, that's what I want. So I'm going to say yes. And now what it's doing is drawing from needle number 1, showing you exactly where this embroidery design all along the outside is going to go. All right, so that helps you make sure that this needle number 1 is not going to hit the hoop while it's embroidering. And let's go back up here, and it's showing you as it draws out that that's what this is doing. And so now it's returning back to the center, and there it drew out your design. So we're going to do that again. And this time I'm going to show you what I use to make sure that the top of this design is lined up where it's supposed to be down here on the machine. So let's go here, and I'm going to do an outline check as well. Now keep in mind, stop and start. You hit start to let it go ahead and start doing the outline check. But I'm going to hit stop when it gets to the very top, preferably towards the middle. Stop it so that we can see where needle number 1 is going. Okay, so let's hit outline check, confirm, move frame, yes. And now it's starting. And now right about here is where I want to stop it. All right, so stop. So the cool thing is it dipped down just a little bit, so I'm gonna back it up. All right, by holding that button, and it backed up. All right, so now I see where this is, and that's the top part towards the middle of the embroidery design. So come down here, needle number 1. Let me get you to focus. Needle number 1 is right here, this foot, this guy right here. And again, here is my line right there. All right, so I don't know how well you can see that, but this is off quite a bit. I need to slide the hoop forward some so that the needle can go back and be right over the top of that line, because that's what I want. All right, so it needs to come back a good little bit, good little ways, so that this needle will be centered right over the top of that. And see, it's behind it, it's not in the right place. So let's come up here. It's still in the middle of the outline trace, and I stopped it. So let's go up here to the hoop, and remember, I want to move the hoop forward some, so I'm going to press this button here to move it down and line this needle up with that line right there. So let me hit that button to move it down. All right, now I'm gonna check again by pulling this down to see where it's lining up, and it's still not quite on that line. It's still off a good little bit. Whoops, sorry, it's still off. You see the barely the line right there. So I'm gonna move it down some more. All right, and now when I pull it down, I think, me personally, I think I moved it a little too far back, so I'm gonna move it back up some. Check it again, and to me that's perfect. That is perfect. So now that I know that it's lined up the middle and it's lined up to where the embroidery is at the very top here, now what I'm going to do is come out of this menu and let it finish, because I adjusted the hoop and I want to make sure that this foot is not going to hit the edge of the frame, because I did move it up pretty high. Okay, so we're going to hit go and let it finish out, and then we'll pay attention to where it actually is tracing itself. But when I get here, I want to show you something pretty neat that I like about the display. So let's hit start, and I want you to see something with this. See how it went up above it? See how the line moved? That's letting me know that white was the old setting and now the blue is the new. So I know now it's tracing the correct thing. And when I look at needle number 1, it's not near hitting the hoop. So I'm gonna let it go again. See, needle number 1 was a good ways away from that hoop, and that's what I need to confirm, that this is not going to hit the side of the hoop. That's what it means when it says always trace the design. And that's how I line up my jackets on the red line to make sure that the embroidery is not going to be off center or going to hit the hoop or anything like that. Is tracing out the design. And using the foot and using my marks to make sure everything is where it's supposed to be. Now that that's in there stitching out and this is hooped and ready to go, as soon as that's finished, I'm going to show you the process of what I do to get the rhinestones around the back of the jacket. So move that out the way. And as I mentioned, I had a template created especially to go around and fit around that design. So I pretty much just brush the stones into place. And once the stones are in place, then I will pick these up. So I'm going to stop the video and come back after all of these stones are pretty much in place, because doing this one-handed is a fool. As you see, it's sliding, and that's not what's supposed to be happening. So let me get these brushed in place and I will be right back. All right, I thought about it and I'm like, just mount the camera and then you can see it. All right, so let's go ahead and finish brushing these in so that I can get this transfer ready and get this jacket pressed with the rhinestone design. Now what I generally have is assistant help that blings these transfers for me, and then as I'm switching out jackets and getting jackets prepared, bling transfers are, and while I'm pressing one transfer, bling transfers are being created more so that I can have like an assembly line, so to speak, to get these jackets knocked out. But by myself today, so let's get these out of the way. I'm brushing off the excess. Because I like to keep a pretty neat workspace, and when I go to pick up the stones, I don't want to pick up a bunch of loose stones. I only want to pick up the stones that are in the template. So that's why I go through the trouble of getting all of these moved off to the side. All right, and so I'm just gonna rub my finger over the surface, because what that does is lets me find the loose stones that are not in holes, and then I can either put them in holes or brush them off of the template. So, and then I'm picking up extra stones to make sure that all of the holes are filled. That red line is in there working its heart out, isn't she? Grateful it's working. All right, and so here's another one. Put that in place. And these are SS6 size stones, in case you were wondering. These are crystal AB SS6 stones, hot fix, that are going on the back of the jacket. So I will need to heat press these stones onto the back of the jackets. All right, here's that one. Here's this one. Here's this one. And then I see 3 more empty spots so far. All right, I'm brushing my hand over again. 2 more spots I just see. Just found. Looks great to me. All right, now, so make sure that these extra stones are all out of the way. And now at this point, what I'm going to do is pick up these stones, and we use transfer tape for that. I tend to use mine about 3 times each time. No specific reason, but I want to make sure that it's definitely sticky enough to pick up stones every time. And then I do a U shape and just lay it down pretty quick. And then smooth my hand over the top to make sure that the glue catches, the adhesive rather catches the tops of these stones, so that when I pull up the tape, it picks all of them up. And this gets more difficult the more times you use this transfer, because like I said, this is the third time I'm using it. So after this, the stickiness may not be as strong, so I may not use this again. But the thing is, once I peel this back, notice how it's picking up all the stones. That's what you want. If you pick it up and you see some stones are left, then smooth on it again and try to get all your stones up. But sometimes when you use your stuff too much, it'll not pick up all the stones. All right, yay. So that's all the stones, and I will do this again for the rest of the jackets, because as I mentioned, there's 13 jackets that need stones on them. All right, so let's slide that up towards the top. Let me grab a jacket that has the embroidery completed on it. Look at that excellent job the Redline did. All right, and so I'm going to get this as flat as possible, and there's some stray stitches that I need to trim and get those out of the way. And of course I don't see my scissors, so I'm going to just use a blade carefully and trying really hard. Why is this not cutting? Trying not to cut the jacket, of course. All right. So now that I have that, I'm going to, which is the other reason why I mark an inch down to make sure the embroidery doesn't go higher than that, because I need stones to go up here too, and I don't need the stones to hit this tab on the jacket. So now what I'll do is line this up around the embroidery, and because this jacket is small, it's closing in on it, so sometimes you gotta fight with it a little bit. But ultimately, I definitely want to be sure that the margins on this side are equal, and I definitely don't want stones on the embroidery. They need to be above it. So I'm going to make that adjustment really quickly. Slide this up, and now the stones are above it. And that's how I put my stones around the embroidery. Now when I put this on the heat press, I have to make sure that this does not get on the heat press platen, because if it does, then these stones here won't get contact from the heat press platen. So I have to make sure this is over the edge of the heat press, so that this part of the jacket is getting pressed, not that, and then we'll be done. So I'm going to run to the heat press, and you'll be able to see what that looks like once the platen isn't under that tab. So one moment and I'll be back with that. Now the heat from the heat press makes the fabric dark. As you see, it makes the red darker so that you can actually see where I stopped the heat press. Notice it's darker right here, so this is where the press was, so that I can make sure that those stones were properly pressed in place. So 350 degrees for about 12 seconds, and here we have our bling around our embroidery. Just that simple. And the back of this jacket is now done. So I'm gonna have to do the front. There's embroidery that goes down the front of each jacket as well, and then here is going to have the team name over here, and then on this side the girl's name goes here. So this is how I do my team jackets with the embroidery and the bling. And this is also I hope you guys enjoyed seeing how to line up the embroidery on an industrial machine, because it's quite different, especially without that laser light to help you, as well as certain controls that are on that specific machine, that you have to learn and not figure out, but you have to learn how to line up your embroidery. So I enjoyed doing this video with you guys. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. If you're interested in a Redline, a totally awesome embroidery machine, I will put a link in the description below for Redline. So I appreciate y'all taking the time to watch the video, and until the next time I see you, I hope you have happy embroidering.